Hello and welcome to lesson 1 of week 1. My name is Mildred and I am your instructor for this course. This is the Python for Data Science course, and we are going to look at all of the fundamental concepts that we need to move into artificial intelligence and to be able to do machine learning. In this lesson, we are going to look at the basic concepts and advance what we've learned in Python fundamental to create solutions that we can use for production. First of all, for you to start this course, refer to your lesson resource to see how you set up your development environment. Basically, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code as the IDE. You can feel free to use any IDE of your choice, but this is the one I will be using for all the examples. You have links to download the Visual Studio Code if you wish to use this, and also to download the latest version of Python for your operating system. And you also want to look at how you can configure your IDE for Python. Now, when that is done, we always want to create a virtual environment, and the reason we do this is we don't want to install something to our entire system. We want to have a virtual environment that we always activate, so that when we install dependencies or packages, it's just within that environment and it doesn't interfere with other apps that you might have on your system. So for Windows, you can research to see the command you will use, but it's basically similar. And for Mac, you can install the latest version of Python by using Brew, and refer also to your lesson resource to see that. Once Python is installed, or you want to upgrade the version you have, if you have a lower version, you want to upgrade to the latest version, you want to see if you have Python installed, you come to your terminal and you do Python 3, the double dash and version. So I have the latest version of Python, and Python comes default with a package manager, which is pip, and we use pip to install stuff. So you can also check if you have pip and the version installed. Okay, and we have the version of pip here already. So now it is time for us to start. Before you start, you have all of this installed and you want to create your virtual environment. We have the VENV that we use to install or to create a virtual environment. For this, I will say Python 3, the M flag, then VENV. Now I want to put a name for my virtual environment. I'll call it .venv. I always like to use a dot for those kind of environment files or for package files with a dot, so that it will be a hidden file. You can give it any name you want. I can make this my env, but I'll name it venv and enter. Once successfully created, you should see a .venv file here, and now you have to activate it before you start writing your code. So to activate this, sometimes you might have permissions problem if you are not logged in as an admin. You want to put a dot, a space, and then for Linux and Mac system, you want to type the name of your virtual environment, because mine starts with a dot, and that's why I put a second dot, venv/bin/activate. And when I enter, I will see the name of my virtual environment in parentheses in front here. So I have it activated. For Windows, you will say venv/scripts. I think for scripts/activate.bat. So you can find out how to activate the virtual environment for Windows or for your operating system, but the steps is basically the same. So now you can start installing dependencies when you need them. We have inbuilt modules in Python, and there are some modules that we have to install before we can even import them. So it is for those modules that we want to make sure we have our virtual environment, so we don't have a system-wide installation, but we install it just for this project. We learn in Python fundamental course how to create a function, and we say we create a function with a def keyword like this, and then a name for the function. Now in a pair of parentheses, you can supply a parameter and you can leave it blank. If you supply a parameter, it means that when the user calls this function, the user will supply an argument. So in the function definition, it is called a parameter. When you call the function, it is called an argument. So sometimes you find it used interchangeably. So let's say the user will call this function and supply a name, and we just want it to return, and let's use hello. So it will return hello, and let's say the name of the person. I don't know if I can use the format string here. No. So I'll say return hello name. Let's see that. And so when we call this function, we'll say print greet, and I'll put my name, run this, and then we have hello Mildred here in parentheses. But we can do this to print something, and let's say we want it to print hello name like that. And so when I call this function now, greet, and I supply a name, it will just print out the name. So when we use return and we want to return a value, I'm going to show you how we return values, either as as a dictionary most of the time and for the purpose of API development. So we see how this is returned. This is just function definition in its basic form. So every function will return something, and so you use the return statement. In your function definition, when you build your app, you don't want to use print statement. You want to use return like we do that. And if no return is used, you can just use pass so that it doesn't error out. Now we have something we call default parameters. Now this course is for advanced students, and if you don't understand Python yet, then this course is not for you. You'll find yourself struggling a lot. And so for week 0, you want to go to the playlist and watch those videos to catch up with the basics of Python. So if you're struggling with this lesson, you want to go back to the function lesson in Python fundamentals to learn it in its basic form, step by step, to get a deeper understanding. Now we want to look at how we can have default parameters. Now we have said that when you define a function and you provide something in the parentheses, it is called a parameter, and when you call the function, you supply an argument for that parameter. Let's say we want to create a function that returns like exponent. Let's say def, let's call this power, and we want to have a base. So let's say we want to say something like 2 raised to the power of 3. So let's call that power exponent. We can have a default to be 2, so that when we have a default, we'll specify it last like this. And so if we don't supply an argument when we call this function, the default will be used, and if we supply, the default will be overwritten. So let's say we want to return base exponent. So what it will return is base raised to the power of exponent. So every time you have a problem, you can think about all of the basics and make them together to form the solution. Now if I want to print the power and I supply just 2, it will give me 2 raised to the power of 2, because 2 is default when exponent is not provided, and so I'll get 4. But if I do print and I supply 2 and 3, it will give me 2 raised to the power of 3, which will be 8 now, because it will override this 2 to 3, and so I get 8. So that is when we have default parameters. We can have variable length parameters, and we don't know in advance, and when you build your apps, most of the time you'll use something we call args and keyword args. When you use args, let's do an example. Let's say we have let's call this total, and we want to calculate the sum of numbers that are set in. Like if you are building a calculator app, you don't know how many things the person wants to add together. So if you want to add sum and you do sum of 2 numbers and you supply A and B, so only 2 numbers that can be supplied. But if you don't know in advance what the user is going to supply or how many arguments the user will supply, so the user wants to say 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 4 plus 5, you won't know another user wants to have 10 numbers to add. We use an asterisk and a name for a variable. When you have a single asterisk like this and you call args is just a convention. The name can be anything you want, but you must have the single asterisk there. This shows that any number of arguments can be provided, but when the arguments are provided, what do you want to do with it? So let's say we want to have the sum of everything that is provided, and so we'll return. So what we'll return here now is the sum of args. Okay, and now let's say we want to have keyword args. For keyword args, you will use, let's say we want to get the user info, and we don't know the keyword args the person will supply. Maybe some people will say they want to put their first name, their middle name, their last name, their date of birth, their marital status, education, and somebody just wants to provide first and last name, and you don't know in advance. You use double asterisk for keyword args like this. And now keyword args, this keyword args can be any name you want. Convention is just to write keyword args like this, but you can now do what you want this function to do in the definition here. And let's say we just want to return the keyword args, right? And we'll see this, for example, when we are building an app for production and we connect to a database, and we want to have like a function that, like a helper function that will collect all of the information entered and send it to a database table. And if we're using the same function for different database tables, we don't know in advance what the field names are, what table we want to process information into, what form is filled in. We just have that helper function to insert into the record. So we use something like keyword args there, because now we want to put the keyword as the name of the column and the value as the value to be inserted in the column, things like that. So you let your imagination run wild and you see what you can do with all of this. But as we go every week, we'll build an app and it will guide you to understand. Now again, if you do not have the basic understanding of functions, I'm going a little too fast. You have to go back to the basics and understand functions and come back to this lesson. The 10 weeks of this course is going to be fast-paced, and you have to make sure you don't fall behind. So every week it is important that you go back to the basics of this topic and then come back to this advanced concept. So now we want to print the total. Let's say we want to print a total of 4, 3, 5 and 6, and let's say we want to also print, we'll call the function user info, and now we're using keyword argument. So let's say I want to supply first name, for instance. I'll say first name is equal to Mildred, and then I'll have middle name is equal to Aisha, and I'll have last name is equal to, let's say, Christopher, like this. And I'll clear here, and when I run, you have the total of 4 plus 3 plus 5 plus 6 will give us 18. And here we want to return the keyword args, and so we have a dictionary of name value pairs return as I type them in. If I print user info again and I put something else, you will see that it does not matter. I don't know in advance what the keyword argument will be. So whether if I want to put this to say this person is only filling their biological sex, I'll say female, and let's say they want to put education, and let's say they put something graduate degree, and let's say the person wants to fill in, let's say age, and now age is going to be an integer, so we don't need to quote this. And so let's say the person puts an age 85, for instance. So when we run again, we'll see that it prints out the name and the value. And so this is very helpful to understand when you are building. Now Python has several built-in functions. We've seen how we use like the len function in Python fundamental to get the number of items in maybe a sequence type or the length of something. We've seen how we are using this print function to print out something. We have the type function to get the type of a variable. We have input function, range function. So you want to also go back to read about built-in functions. You see how we use the sum here. So there are several of them. Refer to your lesson resource to see some of them, and you can go to the Python documentation to just know what exists. You don't need to have it in your head, so that you can easily use an inbuilt function when they exist to solve a problem rather than reinvent the wheel, as they'll be more optimized for your code. Now we have looked at all of these, and we can't use this code like this in production, especially when we build APIs. We want to have type hints, and in the next lesson we are going to look at the type hints and return values in Python. Thank you, and see you in the next lesson.